Welcome to this session of flash presentations on interculturality and science diplomacy training. My name is Daniela Palmberg, and I'm the community manager of the Insight Project, and I work at UNESCO in Paris, currently based in London because we're teleworking. And this session is organized by the Horizon 2020 funded project Inside, Inventing a Shared Science Diplomacy for Europe. And it builds on the topics that were explored in our open conference in Erlangen last week, in which the focus was on communication and cooperation, not only across national or ethnic cultures, but also across the cultures that are specific of professional fields or scientific disciplines, and of course what this means for practicing, teaching, and understanding this sometimes fuzzy concept of science diplomacy. And there were quite a few theories on how best to prepare students or practitioners for the challenges at the science and diplomacy interface, how to do this better online, and how to ensure gender balance and equality in the process, as well as being able to build recognition of the hard and soft power attached to science and to technology today. And Inside also conducted a pilot training program this year and in 2020, in which the idea was to teach science diplomacy through the project's own historical case studies. And a few of the alumni of the training, the Warsaw Science Diplomacy School, are here today, and they'll be sharing presentations. So with this webinar, we are opening up the conversation more broadly. We invited abstracts along this general theme of interculturality and science diplomacy training, and we received responses that were really diverse in nature, yet well aligned with the theme at the same time. And I think that really just shows how far the idea of interculturality can extend and how much energy and interest there is in developing effective training in this still relatively unknown and sometimes misunderstood notion of science diplomacy. So with these presentations, they will each be 5 minutes long, and I will try to be pretty strict on timing. After every 2 or 3 presentations, there's 10 minutes for questions, which can come from the audience or any of the other speakers. So I hope that no one will be shy with their questions or their comments. And with this, I would like to introduce our first speaker. So Nari is a researcher at the Center for International Cooperation Policy at the Korea Institute of Science and Technology Evaluation and Planning, also known as KISTEP. She's been there since 2016, and since last year, since 2020, she's been involved in a project on the establishment of strategies and systems for science and technology diplomacy, launched by the Korea Ministry of Science and ICT. So Nari, please go ahead, the floor is yours.
Thank you for the introduction, Daniela. I'll share my screen for the presentation. Good afternoon, everyone. It's actually 9:30 p.m. in South Korea. I'd like to share development of SNT diplomacy in South Korea today. We call science diplomacy as SNT, science and technology diplomacy, as the national structure and system cover SNT together. Please do note that SNT diplomacy is basically the same concept as science diplomacy. I will give presentation in the order of introduction about us, some of major findings from the survey, and result of SNT Diplomacy Academy. KISTEP is a government-affiliated research institute, and we work closely with Ministry of Science and ICT of Republic of Korea. Main functions of KISTEP are technology foresight, SNT policy planning, and others, as you can see. At the Center for International Cooperation Policy, we have two main branches of functions. One is to perform international cooperation of KISTEP, and second is to conduct research on international cooperation policy in S&T areas. For the second part of the function, some of the projects we conducted are establishment of strategies and system for S&T diplomacy, establishment of Korea-UN ASCAP S&T cooperation, and many others. Especially as part of the S&T diplomacy project, we're developing S&T diplomacy and academy in Korea. I won't go into too much details to save the time. The survey was conducted to investigate awareness and opinion of Korean professionals in science, technology, and diplomacy fields, and to collect backup information for developing S&T Diplomacy Academy last year. We distributed a structured online questionnaire to 912 professionals, and it contained 25 questions on 5 categories, such as experience in S&T diplomacy or international cooperation, and S&T diplomacy education and training program. Here are some major findings from the survey. 55% of participants have heard about the term science diplomacy, and 45% have never heard the term until the survey. The green pie shows 77% of professionals in S&T fields felt diplomacy knowledge is necessary for their work, and the yellow pie shows 64% of professionals in diplomacy felt S&T knowledge is necessary for their work. If we take a closer look at what specific knowledge is needed, international organization and global governance, international relations and security, and others were in priority for diplomacy knowledge. For S&T knowledge, industry technology and technology convergence were in high demands. The last pie shows that 85% answered that S&T diplomacy education and training program is necessary. I'd like to explain the in-depth analysis, but I'll stop here. And what we found is that there were high demands for interdisciplinary engagement between S&T and diplomacy. The Academy was developed and held in cooperation with National Science and Technology Human Resources Development Center, KRD. The first Academy was held as a 3-day program, 2 days consisting live online lectures, and 1 day consisting of workshop and a forum that I will shortly explain soon. We developed a total of 8 modules, such as Introduction to S&T Diplomacy, S&T Diplomacy Trends and International Politics, International Organizations related to S&T fields, etc. Participants answered that the most useful lectures were in the order of skill-up workshop, S&T diplomacy, skill-up workshops, and S&T diplomacy capacity building, and so on. We received comments from the participants to add a lecture on ODA related to S&T, to reduce theoretical lectures on S&T diplomacy, and to increase networking between participants. Based on the feedback, we improved the second Academy, which was in high demands for registration after the first Academy was more publicized, and the participants answered that the most useful lectures as skill-up workshop, negotiation skills, and so on. Participants commented to diversify courses for different types of participants, and to add a lecture to introduce what kinds of strategies or cases are available from other ministries. We also held the S&T Diplomacy Forum to increase awareness and promote networking among professionals. The forum was held jointly with the Academy, and the third forum is scheduled to be held in next year. We're looking for opportunities for collaboration, so if you're interested, please contact us. That is all for my presentation. I finished in time. Thank you for listening.
Thank Thank you very much, Nari. I think you finished just in time. Very, very well done. And if anyone already has questions, please go ahead and you can already put them in the chat while we move on to our next speaker, which is Zane. Zane Šime is an affiliated researcher at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology. Her focus is on the European Union's science diplomacy towards the southern neighborhood. And recently, she's completed research at the United Nations University Institute of Comparative Regional Integration Studies and the Academy of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. So Zane, please you can take the floor.
Thank you so much. I'll be sharing my screen now. Can you see the full screen?
No, it seems like it's either frozen or you have the wrong window up.
I see it full screen.
Maybe redo it. Try redoing it.
Okay. How about now?
No, it seems to still not be showing. Do you want me to share it for you?
Yes,
I think you sent
maybe
it to
that would be wise.
Okay. Okay. This is what you need, right?
Exactly.
Okay, please go ahead.
Is it possible to put it full screen, or this is the exact setup?
Is that better?
Yes, thank you so much. Okay, so it is my great pleasure to address you 1 week after the 13th Asia-Europe meeting, or ASEM video conference. During the meeting, President von der Leyen announced that the European Commission will soon present the Global Gateway strategy. The Global Gateway will build on the 2018 EU-Asia connectivity strategy, updating it to the current context. The predecessor of the Global Gateway incorporated the people-to-people dimension in the overall thinking on connectivity. This aspect brings to my article, EU-India Relations in a Multi-Vector Matrix of Science Diplomacy and Asia-Europe Meeting. My analytical take and contributions from other researchers and thought leaders form a good basis for advancing people-to-people connectivity on a global scale. In more specific terms, online training events deserve more attention as a form of people-to-people connectivity. My article elaborates on how online training events, including the Warsaw Science Diplomacy School, gained prominence in the context of the COVID-19 imposed restrictions on the geographical mobility. The auto-ethnographic account provides some ideas on what higher education extracurricular and capacity building activities should be taken into consideration when taking a comprehensive look at the people-to-people dimension of sustainable connectivity. As the analyzed 3 online training events that took place over the summer 2020 show, these virtual occasions of people-to-people encounters are promising building blocks for the future exploration of the EU structural diplomacy towards India, both in a bilateral setting and a multi-vector multilateral context of the Asia-Europe meeting. Additionally, the Global Gateway context invites to add a broader international dimension to it. That would be it from my side. Thank you. Daniela, please unmute yourself.
Thank you very much, Sana, for that presentation, and thank you as well to Nari. We can now open up the floor to any questions. So if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box that you see at the bottom of your Zoom window, or you can also raise your hand, use the raise your hand function also found in that bar, and you can ask your questions. So we'll do questions until about 55 past. So since I don't see any questions right this second, I would actually be curious to know with Nari, the presentation about the academy that you made, it's very similar to the structure of our Warsaw Science Diplomacy School. We also did first an initial program, which Sana was actually part of, and then we collected extensive evaluations and tried to improve on that. And I was wondering, do you also have any data on the differing opinions between different disciplines and different professions? Do you see any trends in different needs and I guess perspectives on what science and technology diplomacy means between scientists, diplomats, policymakers, or social scientists as well?
Unfortunately, we only collected this online questionnaire. We distributed this online questionnaire to all these professionals, and we collected the raw data in this massive files, and we only analyzed them in based on our questions. And the questions didn't really ask how different professionals thought about what the meaning of science diplomacy is, because we suspected that they wouldn't really have a concept on what this science diplomacy or SNT diplomacy is. And as it turns out, like I showed in my presentation, 55% of the participants, the respondents heard about the science diplomacy, but 45% have never heard the term until the survey. So we, through the survey, we were able to have this basis that we need to develop this concept and nurture human resources in SNT or diplomacy to be more more professionalized in this field.
Okay, very cool. And do you have plans on taking that academy further? And
yes, we do. Yes, we do.
Yeah?
For next year, we will probably hold one more academy. This year, it was just a pilot program, so we held it in the first semester and the second semester, but maybe next year we're trying to do it for maybe in the first half of the year, and maybe have a larger number of participants for the academy. And we are looking for a lot of just possible collaboration opportunities for this program, because I know that in Europe, a lot of researchers are actively engaged in this science and diplomacy. And we actually, last year, we had a massive in-depth research on the science diplomacy. And as we were doing that, we realized that in the Horizon Europe 2020 program, there are 3 projects, and one of them was INSEED. And one of the reasons why it looks so similar is that because we referenced our program to your programs, and we actually saw all these open documents and open workshop materials that were available to researchers, and how this negotiation skills or all these topics that you guys were dealing with were crucial for science diplomacy. So we tried to incorporate that into our program as well. And I was surprised that a lot of international cooperation coordinators or the correspondents, they were very happy to know that we were developing this program, and they were in high demands for this program because they wanted to develop their career path, and they wanted to be more professional in their fields. And every time they go into foreign countries, or they talk to diplomats, because the Korean diplomats or the ambassadors, they are always replaced every 2 to 3 years or 5 years, and all these correspondents, they always change. And these international cooperation officers, they were feeling really high demands to further the cooperation, or to be more active, take the part as a science diplomat. So we are trying to be more active in this.
That's really great to hear. That's very exciting that you found our project as well before this session. I have a question from Sean Hardy in the audience, and he's wondering about the understanding of this science diplomacy term, and he's asking, I'm still surprised by the large number of respondents who mentioned that they had not heard of the term science diplomacy before. Do you think this is more linked to terminology or a general disciplinary siloing? And he directs it at Nari, but I think maybe Zane will have some insight on this question as well. So maybe Zane can go first, and then we'll return to Nari for your reply afterwards.
Okay, I guess my short answer would be understanding of science diplomacy depends on your own professional background. If you come more from an academic setting, perhaps then you're more inclined to speak about certain theoretical currents that are represented among those who are currently developing science diplomacy approach in a scholarly dimension. If you're from a policy background, then perhaps you're more inclined to talk about specific planning instruments, about specific policy frameworks. That would be it from my side.
Yeah, absolutely. Nari, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I agree with Zane. I think the professionals from science diplomacy, they think about science diplomacy in a complete different concept. I think because they never heard about the term, and because they don't know what diplomacy actually does, or the actual international relations do. When you talk about science diplomacy, a lot of times I see scientists, they confused the term with international cooperation. So I think that's one of the reasons why in European researchers, they are trying to also theoretically build more stronger foundation for this science diplomacy. But from my point of view, I personally think that science diplomacy is making differences through science in policy and making social changes. So I try to approach this concept through there, and that's how I try to always, when I meet all these stakeholders or researchers, I try to explain this term as that. So maybe that's why they've never heard about the term, or they're confused with this term.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we in our evaluations and our conversations with people, we see the exact same thing. Often there is a generalization of science diplomacy that people understand it as just two different countries working on science together. But of course, there has to be an actual diplomacy component as well for it to be classified as that. So I think we are unfortunately at the end of this question segment. So we'll go ahead and move on to the next session. I think if Nari and Zane would like to answer some of the additional questions that just came in the chat and the Q&A box, you could maybe type out some answers to that while we move on to the next presentation. The next one is going to be a double with Ibon, Santiago, and Tobias Hoffmann. And Ibon Santiago is a member of the physics department at the Technical University of Munich in Germany. He's an Alexander von Humboldt Research Fellow and holds a PhD in physics. And Tobias Hoffmann is an RNA scientist and holds a PhD in biomedicine. They are both alumni of the Barcelona SciTech DiploHub Summer School on Science Diplomacy. So Tobias and Ibon, please, you can go ahead with your presentation.
Okay, I'm gonna start and share my screen. 1 second. You should see it now, right?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay,
Thanks.
then I start. So good afternoon, everyone. We are Ibon and Tobias, and we want to talk about if science diplomacy can help to diversify human genomes in biobanks. And it's actually a good moment to talk about this, as this year marks the 20th anniversary of the first draft of the first human sequence. To know the genetic sequence of individuals is highly important, as it enables personalized medicine. And this is a long dream of scientists. And it basically means that you have individual patients and you design an individual treatment for them. For this, genetic sequencing is crucial, and this personalized medicine comes closer to reality, as the cost of sequencing per human genomes have fallen drastically over the last 20 years. This development is already used by companies, so this technique is likely to stay. For public research, biobanks are collecting genomes, and biobanks are in fact crucial to understand how genetic factors are related to disease outcomes. And biobanks enable public research institutions to use their data. So analyzing genomes allows them to identify small difference between genomes of different people. And as an example, we have put this figure here. So we have a short piece of sequence for several individuals here. And where 3 have the same sequence, there's a slight difference here for one individual. If this individual now has developed a disease and we have a high enough number of individuals in the biobank, we can actually draw conclusions and identify small genetic variations as risk factors. An example is the UK Biobank that tries to do exactly this, and they have already published a vast amount of data, but just a few days ago, they published 200,000 new human genomes to be used for research. However, there's an important factor to take into account, and this is that the described conclusions on genetic risk factors can only be drawn if the biobank then represents the whole population at the right proportions. And Ibon will now take over and tell you a bit more about how biobanks are doing on this issue.
Thank you, Tobias. So here we see that biobanks around the world lack in diversity. So on the left-hand side, we see that the largest biobanks around the world are located in the global north and China, and therefore their samples are primarily from those geographic locations. We see on the right-hand side that biobanks are dominated mostly by European samples, European individuals, up to 95%. So this underrepresentation of communities puts the research at risk. And we think that science diplomacy efforts can address this lack of diversity in biobanks by treating biobanks as an international resource. So we propose that stakeholders, such as governments, public health institutions, research institutions that support national biobanks, they can exchange data in a standardized and safe way to form an international biobank, a worldwide biobank. So what are the problems regarding this approach? Well, there are lack of resources, both personnel and facilities. The way samples are collected across countries varies in the way they're stored and analyzed. It is not clear who owns or who should collect this data and why it is interesting to make it public around the world. And then the elephant in the room is all the ethical and legal issues surrounding this topic, particularly privacy and the asymmetric legal landscape around the world regarding genetic privacy. So science diplomacy approach led by governments and other institutions can provide solutions such as tech transfer, standardization and open access, and also foster the creation of an unbiased, independent governance of a worldwide genomic database. And this can be done by using already existing structures and partnerships, and fostering more a global North and global South partnership. And regarding the ethical issues, one can start using emerging technologies that support privacy-friendly approaches. So more on this topic in an upcoming work that we have done. So we might think that this approach can be ambitious or daunting, but the reality is that we have seen this and we are seeing it today, right? So there has been an unprecedented sequencing of viral genome and data sharing of data around the world to study the spread of the virus and pinpoint variants, right? So such an approach is possible. So we think that with diverse biobanks and with the use of sophisticated bioinformatic tools, one can be closer to personalized medicine and accelerating diagnosis and for the public health. So thank you, and happy to take questions.
Thank you very much to both of you. That's a very interesting project and proposal you have going on. Once again, if you have any questions already, please go ahead and write them out while we already move ahead to the next speaker, who is Mohammed Adeel. And he is a career diplomat in Pakistan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He's assigned to the Science Diplomacy Division there. He is also completing a PhD in biotechnology at Western Australia State Agricultural Biotechnology Centre at Murdoch University in Australia. Adeel, the floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Daniela. Really glad to be here with friends and very familiar faces. That's the beauty of science diplomacy, brings together stakeholders. And thank you for the previous presentation. It provides a really good segue into what I'm supposed to talk about. So I have a unique career path both as an academic and as a practitioner. So what I'll talk about is the implication of science diplomacy for biotech. Biotech and the way it is regulated, how the products and the services reach the people is a very good science diplomacy subject, because the complication with the intersection of policy, as the stakeholders pointed out in the previous presentation, there's a lot of silos as well as complicated regulatory processes. So I talk about the framework that I followed during my doctoral project is looking at how science diplomacy can help create a more evidence-based and not a restrictive regulatory framework for biotech. So if you look at how the international regulatory framework of biotech looks at, you can see that there are 8 to 9 different conventions. And what you will imagine is that there should be a lot of crosstalk between these conventions, but there isn't. So you can see in front of your eyes what are the silos that exist at the intergovernmental level. So if you look at the Cartagena Protocol, the way it defines biotech, perhaps excludes or unnecessarily regulates different forms of biotechnologies. And if you look at how FD arms control, so there's a lot of silos as well as interconnectivity that makes it a science diplomacy subject. So if you look at the key issues, first and most important with regards to new and emerging tech is the element of institutional drift. Technology is evolving faster than regulations, so that creates a big problem for the academia and the industry. Then treaty conflict. So there's a transatlantic divide. There's a good amount of literature in the form of socio-technical imaginaries that discusses how the socio-technical imagery in the European Union versus the one in the towards the Atlantic sides, it's a combating narrative, and it's creating conflict. And so technology takes the backseat. And then how do we define risk? That's again where the scientific dimension or the socio-economic dimension should be considered. And it's a whole scholarly debate around it. And what about the convergence? So you have got nanobiotech, quantum, and bioinformatics that are impinging AI as well. So when these converging technologies come and give us new products, how are we going to regulate them, or how are we going to restrict, or how do we define risk then? So these are the key issues. What is the solution? This is the framework that I've explored, studied, and expanded on during the course of my thesis. So 3 dimensions. First is the dimension of science communication, very crucial. The conventional model of science communication assumes a deficit model. It assumes that the audience do not have enough information to make a decision. But science diplomacy provides a multi-stakeholder engagement platform. So it's not a one-way communication. It provides a dynamic interchange. Crucially, it can enable scientists to talk about gene editing as a potential food security and a climate change solution. So tethering your science to the sustainable development goals really allows you to reach to audiences across the world. Then importantly, bridging the gap between epistemic authority and public perception. So that's a major silo. When we talk about biotech and how it is conveyed to the people, there's a lot of misconception. And with disinformation and misinformation coming in, there's more necessity for adding to the science communication dimension. The biotech game is a negotiation simulation that I've developed during the course of my doctoral work. It role plays the Cartagena protocol. So we have tried it with different audiences, more than 300 to date, in which policymakers, diplomats, early career researchers sit in a room and discuss and debate on how to regulate new breeding technologies such as gene editing under the Cartagena protocol. So the results, the pre and the post perception surveys have been quite positive, and it clearly indicates that the negotiation process allows the stakeholders to really understand the complexity of the process and not consider it as a binary. Secondly, at the level of the process, so science diplomacy, as it is argued in the different international conventions, that's where the science diplomacy process can actually really enable science advice coming in. So the diplomats that are participating in the processes, education through the biotech game, it's another incentive. And then the way we in the previous presentation on a global biobank, similarly a global regulatory observatory for gene editing. So you actually debate the science and the social outcomes at a diverse fora, not where it is driven by a singular agenda. And lastly, at the level of the product, if you want to ensure equitable trade, harmonization of regulations is very important. Because of the transatlantic divide, countries have to pick and choose. And that really hampers their ability to benefit from new and emerging technologies. Secondly, if you have to address trade barriers, you have to also deploy science diplomacy and bring capacity building and confidence building to states that are unable to do so. And lastly, facilitating small exporters. The biggest advantage of gene editing was that since it was cheaper than previous avenues of modification, it had the opportunity to democratize the new breeding technology industry. But if you overregulate it, it will remove the incentive, and then we'll go back to the commodification barrier that has been discussed earlier. So really thank you for this opportunity, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Adeel, and thank you, Tobias and Ibon as well. So we'll now open up to another 10 minutes of questions. And we do have a few questions and comments in here written. And so I will first read a comment that we have from Anton, who points out that there's a similar and very clear example of science diplomacy from plant research. He mentions the Svalbard Global Seed Vault, which stores the backup of seeds of the crops from the world for the case of, in case of species extinction. And then we have a question from Sarah, who wants a little bit more information about the biobanks. She's wondering, when did these biobanks begin collecting information? How do they currently collect information? And how can we manage local collection of samples? Is it managed by postal mail-ins? And is there science diplomacy in that? I will go ahead and read another question as well and then we can turn it over to you guys. Is institutional drift increasing exponentially? Someone asks in regard to what was mentioned by you, Adeel. And so if it's possible to remember those, and also one more question, I would just also like to see if you have some any thoughts on academies of science as actors in this. Have they been involved so far in any of the efforts in regard to the biobanks? And also, Adeel, if you envision them as stakeholders in your simulation exercise that you work on. So maybe Tobias and Santiago can begin, followed by Adeel.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I start and you jump in, Ibon, at some point. I mean, maybe to answer Sarah's question first about when did these biobanks begin collecting information, I think it's not so easy to answer this very precisely, because a biobank, I mean, we talk here about biobanks that collect human genomes, and there's a biobank would also collect other samples, for example, tumor data or tissue data for certain disease. So there's a whole lot of biobanks that collect those kind of data. But these genome biobanks have been increasingly becoming a thing that is just recently, because it is now possible to have enough human genomes sequenced, because now you can actually pay for it. I mean, just 20 years ago, it was impossible from a financial point of view to make such an effort. And the UK Biobank, of course, has a very sophisticated process. So they are kind of collecting them in a central store and have huge fridges where all the sampling is done. And you can access it computationally. Basically, they do the sequencing, and you can, as a research institute, ask for access. You have to fulfill certain requirements, but then you are able to analyze this data for your own research question. And I think there's also these commercial companies where you indeed can just post them some kind of sample of yourself, and then they do the analysis. However, this is a commercial, and this is not for biobanks, and most of this is done nowadays for very basic medical questions, or for this kind of ancestry, where you look for your past relatives and you see if you can get actually some information. So this is more from a hobby.
Yeah, so first of all, thanks for Anton's comment. It is very interesting to know what's going on in the area of conservation and ecology, certainly plants, as you mentioned, but also other species. So that's a very good example. Regarding the origin of biobanks, I agree with Tobias, it's hard to pinpoint that, but as he mentioned, the UK Biobank is one of the examples we're more familiar with, and that one started around 2006, collecting data. And the way it works is, they recruit members. The members, they have to sign some paperwork, some consent, privacy issues, etc. And then those samples are kept there. There are some links with the NHS, with the public health organization. And I think similar biobanks can be found in the US as well with this approach. Yeah, hope that answers the question.
And then there was these National Academies of Science. I think for what we have drawn out, that would be on the more scientific side, that would enable connection, and I mean, could of course work as a supporter. I mean, there's National Academies of Science, for example. I know from the German one that has cooperations with many other national academies, and this can of course be kind of helping to connect the researchers. But I think from the stakeholders, from the government point of view, they can only be a supporter here, but one would still need, the kind of policy or politics side to also take an important step. I think it cannot be done just by the academies.
Okay, sure, thank you. Maybe Adeel, would you like to jump in now?
Yep, thank you. So on the question of institutional drift, it isn't increasing exponentially, but the platforms are growing more horizontally. So what happens is that, yes, we are generating science advice or giving regulatory advice for the institutions so that they can keep up. But then you've got a layer of geopolitics as well as geoeconomics. So it kind of muddies the field. What worries me is with the influx of, converging technologies, AI and bio, and that's where the problem is, because if we don't utilize good science advice to develop regulatory frameworks, then we're going to, the issue of inequitable of access of technology is going to increase exponentially. That's the problem. We have seen that with the case of COVID vaccines too. And especially, and if you compare biotech versus, let's say, new and emerging tech such as artificial intelligence, biotech has been around for 20-25 years. There's history of safe usage as well. The regulatory framework that has been associated with biotech versus what's being given to the metaverse, it's very different. So not only is institutional drift an important subject for scholars as well as the industry to consider, we also have to look at why is this a dual-sided approach towards tech. As far as the question on the national academies is concerned, they are very important stakeholders in our simulation. We also role play two NGOs as well. So from either side, one NGO informing, more towards the organic versus genetic modification debate, and the other more on the, benefits of gene editing. So National Academy of Sciences, they do generate a lot of science advice, and they also talk about this, the safety of biotech as well. So one of the things that I've explored is, the deficit model of science communication that I briefly talked about. So with the National Academy, yes, they are publishing the reports and providing good material. But at the end of the day, how has that impacted the regulatory processes, especially at the level of, the UN as well as how the EU law is being shaped by the role of the national academies. So, and especially how diffuse biotech is becoming. I've deliberately narrowed down my work towards plant-based biotech or agri-biotechnology. So there's also a whole debate on human gene editing or human augmentation as well. So it's important that these national academies as well, they kind of pivot their roles or, on how they or their advices can impact policy at the end. So what is happening is that there are, that's what is being discussed under the narrative of socio-technical imaginaries, that the imaginaries, especially generating out of national academies, let's say in the US or North America or South America, they kind of portray gene editing as a solution to food security, while towards the EU, it's more about consumer perception, food labeling, and the risks that are associated or, biosecurity related. So it's important that we, kind of connect these narratives for productive outcomes.
Thank you. Thank you very much to all of you. So now we will shift from this quite natural sciences focus to a little bit more of a humanities and social sciences group. So our next speaker is going to be Paulina Gurgul, and she is the head of the Scientific Association at the Collegium Invisibile in Poland and a PhD candidate at the Faculty of Philosophy at the Jagiellonian University. She is an alumni of the European Academy of Diplomacy, which is a partner of the Inside Project and helped us organize our summer school. And she has a specialization on international organization, and she's also been a doctoral researcher at Université Panthéon-Sorbonne and a fellow of the Ryoshi Sasakawa Young Leaders Fellowship Fund. So Paulina, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much. It's a great honor for me to present today the initiative Collegium Invisibile, which could serve for you as an inspirational model for collaboration, for a network, and for sharing knowledge with a wider audience, and as well to help young researchers to develop their interest and share the knowledge in the academic world. Collegium Invisibile is a scientific association which was founded in 1995 in Poland with the support of the Open Society Foundation, and later it became an independent non-governmental organization. And it gathers as well the very talented students and their tutors, which create the community for exchanging knowledge, and which the knowledge is then shared with the wider audience, as well with the high school student, which could be introduced to the academic world in a very early age, thanks to that, educate them into the strict methodological thinking. The way to achieve these goals is to make the tutorials one-to-one academic activities between tutor and expert based on the institution in Poland or abroad, and the student. This one-year collaboration is making a research on the chosen topic, and then it usually results in a common peer-reviewed publication, and the results are as well shared in the internal conference. Here I can show you the map which proves that Collegium Invisibile is the transnational platform to share knowledge between between students from Poland and the academics from all over the world. Most of the tutorials are based in Europe, but we get the connections with the United States as well, and all of the tutors are sharing this knowledge all over the world. And with the stats for last 10 years, we made 235 tutorials, and the number is even more greater because we are active for 25 years, but before it was more national collaboration. To share knowledge with others, we are based on the value of social engagement, and knowledge we get from the academic tutors, we pass by to the high school student in programs called Pyramid of Knowledge. The collegians are making summer school, Olympiad school for the gifted high school students, and as well.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt you. I just wanted to check with you. Is there supposed to be a different slide showing? It's just the first slide now.
Oh no. Yes. So it should be. So I'm sorry if that's the problem. Are you seeing the other slides?
The blue slide, the first slide. With the head.
So, so one moment, I will pass it to the, and right now, is it?
Now it's changing, yes.
Okay, yes, so sorry, this is the first slide with the introduction. Here is the showing how the tutorials work with the academic based here is the archives photography from the scientific camp we are making. Here is the map with the tutorials, which shows the wide network made by Collegium Invisibile. And here is the program Pyramid of Knowledge. We made summer school as well, the Olympiad school for the high school student, and we made the program as well as in collaboration with academic tutor. Collegians serve as the tutors for the high school student, making 1 year collaboration with research on a chosen topic, which gives the very good experience in leadership and mentoring in a very early stage during the university. With the values of social engagement and making this collaboration, we wanted to share the model for networking, for making the intellectually stimulating association, which could be easily reproduced in other countries as well. During our activity, we made good practices we could share with you. And when we are based with the foundation idea of Invisible College made by Robert Boyle in 17th century, and through the adapting the tutorial model from Oxford and Cambridge into the other context of in a Central European context, we made it successful just to develop knowledge and share it all over the world. And this is the contact info if anyone would be interested in getting in touch with us. And there are similar institutions as well in Europe. And during your academic career, there is possible that you will encounter the alumni collegians. And the main idea for this activity is to make the socially engaged knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have to move on quickly now to Tatjana Christelbauer. And she is a sociologist, a intercultural pedagogue, dance and fine artist. She works on the interface of fine arts, social sciences, and humanities in the field of international relations. She says that practice in dance arts is close to modern realism, and her project, the Art Science Diplomacy 2030 project, is grounded in linguistics, identity politics, and social ecology. So I'm very curious to hear about your work, Tatjana. Please, you can take the floor.
Thank you, Daniela. Hello from Vienna. What an impact can make art in science diplomacy, intercultural communication? And how can civilian actors and representatives and practitioners from art communities support science diplomacy policy implementation in sustainable development process? These questions have led me in 2018, I will now share also my presentation, to create an initiative titled Art Impact 2030. It was supported by the UNESCO Paris in the promotion, and it started with a dance project in Rio de Janeiro, by which I have thematized gender roles and environmental humanities. Furthermore, other practices has been also developed within this initiative until 2020 with high school students, in collaboration with Austrian cultural forums, with schools, with universities, with dance professionals, fine artists. So in 2020, July, I have attended a Science for Diplomacy course. And after completing this course, I was inspired to create this platform, Arts for Sciences for Cultural Diplomacy 2030, connecting Art Impact 2030 with a new platform and connecting these cultures together. Intercultural dialogue and need for academic collaboration among arts and science students and professionals with science diplomats and students in diplomacy is given in the fact that art is at the forefront of European and also Austrian cultural diplomacy together with science. Art Science Diplomacy 2030 Intercultural Dialogue opens up opportunities for the establishment of long-term cooperation between multiple stakeholders that can ensure successful science diplomacy responses in time of global challenges, and also serve as a model for the future development of the S4D4C Horizon project with an impact from the civilian sector. The platform will support European science and global science diplomacy by a current paradigm shift from the competitive promotion of national cultures toward collaboration for mutual prosperity through cultural diplomacy 2030 oriented projects, which means culture in narrative of sustainability, which is grounded in perception also of diplomacy as art of practicing communication without leaving damage in relations and relationships, as well as art of performing life acts at all stages within the social and natural environment without leaving any damages, broken hearts, or poisoned traces. Diversity in imagination is considered as a connected with embodied knowledge grounded in intersectional bound of cultures and lifestyles. So let me just jump further. Here are just some insights which I'm referring to. It is very short.
We cannot see your slides.
You cannot see?
No, your slides.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry for that. Let me. I was stressed to keep on time, so sorry for that. Yes, I will just review very shortly. Art Impact Initiative, project in Rio de Janeiro, art exhibition in ETH Zurich, dance projects with agricultural pilot, and work with high school students with Austrian Cultural Forum projects for European Day of Languages, and then attendance of the course Science for Diplomacy Communication, after I have created this virtual platform, which is integrated into the work and activities of the ACD, Agency for Cultural Diplomacy Association, which I'm president and founder. And this project is also considered to be a part of my envisioned PhD research, which should start in 2022 in collaboration with Science Diplomacy Alliance, El-Kedal, and Austrian Cultural Forum and other partners. What has been done and what we already have brought to realization are the presentation in March on the S4D4C team final conference meeting panel, and presentation of this platform. Then we have hosted some experts significant workshops with students. We have created a virtual space academy for high school scholars to encourage citizen science projects addressing mainly effects of the pandemic, especially considering gender-based violence. This fact on the slide is not, unfortunately, anymore true. It is already 30 women killed in Austria by their husband or former partner. And the second important issue is the statistics that in Austria, young people are 16% of them has been diagnosed with high depression and suicidal thoughts. So what we want to bring in is to prevent, to introduce methods and practices from art fields and research which can support prevention of violence, and on the other hand, by connecting linguistic technologies and art-based design in communication with intercultural sensitivity, we want to create tools for digital communication, which can also be implemented in several, in diverse linguistic landscape in Europe and globally. So,
Tatjana, I see that there's still a couple of slides in your presentation, so I'm gonna unfortunately have to ask you to
yes, conclude. This is actually what I wanted to show you and to share. Please contact me if you are interested to hear more. These are some projects, and here is the document from yesterday. We have hosted a whole day conference with the Austrian Cultural Forum with representatives from arts, diplomacy, radio media, and philosophy. So this is my message, and thank you very much for attention. I hope to be able to answer questions if you have some, or to keep in touch by your interest. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tatjana. We'll see how much time we have left for questions at the end. In this case, we have one more presentation before we go on to questions. So now another alumnus of our summer school will present. It's Antonino Puglisi, who has sought out experiences of science and cultures in 4 countries, including in Turkey. Currently, he's a research chemist at the University of Natural Resources and Life Sciences in Vienna, and a research associate at the Faculty of Theology and Religion at the University of Pretoria in South Africa. So I will let Antonino take the floor, and then after that, we will have a short question and answer, and maybe we can put most of those to Antonino since he's getting, unfortunately, the least amount of time now in this section. So please go ahead, Antonino. Thank you.
So hello, everyone. It's a real joy to be among friends today. Science diplomacy is continuously seeking to identify and involve other actors alongside scientists and international institutions in order to fully deploy the power of science for the benefit of society in addressing major global challenges. The current pandemic and the environmental crisis are a stark reminder of the need for global cooperation, working across borders and including different backgrounds and generations. And as we explore the role of interculturality in 21st century scientific action and societal engagement, perhaps we're urged not only to take into account different cultures, but also to specifically unpack the role of various religious beliefs and values in such context. At the peak of the current pandemic, the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, addressed the world's religious leaders in a video conference on the specific role of faith communities in the pandemic. Among other things, he said, "We are all vulnerable, and that shared vulnerability reveals our common humanity." And he adds that the current crisis lays bare our responsibility to promote solidarity as a foundation of our response. But are faith-based communities any relevant nowadays in a discourse about the future of our modern societies? In order to attempt an answer to such a complex issue, perhaps we should take a step back from a Eurocentric, sometimes too Eurocentric worldview, and take a more global geopolitical view. A report by the Pew Research Center Forum on Religion and Public Life estimates that there are around 84% of world population which declare themselves religiously affiliated. And if we look from a more environmental perspective, many of the most important conservation places in the world are considered sacred and deeply rooted in some form of local, spiritual and cultural tradition. More than 7% of the Earth's land surface is owned by religious institutions, and a further 8% are some sort of sacred links. Moreover, a recent report has found that while there are no specific figures estimating the total assets held by faith-based investors, there is strong evidence that the figure revolves around the trillions of dollars. Let alone the impact of faith communities on, for instance, the health service worldwide and the education. So perhaps in the light of these figures, the words of Gutierrez are no surprise, as it's not surprising that many international institutions are increasingly recognizing the importance of working together with FBOs to bring about sustainable development, particularly with reference to the environment. To mention just a few, the WWF has launched the Sacred Earth program in order to better articulate ethical and spiritual ideals around the preservation of the environment. And the UN has several bodies looking for the same objective, like the Multi-Faith Advisory Council, of which I'm also part, at the Interagency Task Force on Religion and Sustainable Development, seeking to better articulate UN's understanding at the intersection between religion, development, human rights, and peace. In 2015, the Catholic Church launched the Laudato Si, which has been hailed as one of the most important interventions in 21st century campaigning in environmental justice. But around the same time, we've seen similar declarations from the Buddhist, the Jewish, the Hindu, and the Islamic community. At the more recent COP26 in Glasgow, I personally witnessed how faith-based communities were visibly present, catalyzing action with their advocacy power through various statements, informal negotiations, fostering alliances for nature conservation. So to conclude, for the majority of people on our planet, spiritual values are still key in driving individual as well as communitarian behavior. Through their emphasis on wisdom, social cohesion, and interrelatedness, FBOs might really be a strategic partner for science diplomacy. In particular, in the context of the current environmental crisis, faith-based communities show the potential not only to effectively mobilize people on the ground in response to climate change, but more importantly, to motivate large sections of the society in order to ensure effective, sustainable development. And with this, I conclude, and I'm happy to take questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Antonino, and thank you as well to Paulina and Tatjana. Unfortunately, we are so quickly running out of time that this section that was supposed to be 15 minutes for 3 speakers is now 5 minutes before the session concludes. And so I will go ahead and pose one question each to the speakers, and if you could please take only 1 minute or so, 1 minute 30, to answer the question that can help us still end on time. So I will take first question from Paulina, to Paulina from the audience. So someone asks, is there any pushback from social actors who do not agree with open science? And also, there is a large Polish diaspora around the world. What are Polish science diplomacy diaspora networks? For Tatjana, there's a question about how do you view the artistic quality of your work as driven more in communication direction or potentially developing as a new aesthetic form? And that question comes from Sean Hardy, who is actually also involved in new interpretations of theater and arts, I know, and works on science diplomacy as well. And for Antonino, I am kind of wondering about the comparison between these faith-based communities that you discuss and the process of integrating indigenous communities into those same conversations. If you see some parallels, common challenges, and options for cooperation. So I will turn it over now to you, and if you could be as brief as possible, that would be great.
Yes.
Thank you. Paulina, go ahead.
Thank you very much for the question. For the first one, there is not much pushbacks because we act pro bono. There is more like a charity volunteering work, so it gets a lot of respect for the social actors. And the only controversies may arouse only from origins, but with our current activity, we are very well respected in the academic society. When it comes to diaspora, Polish diasporas, I would say Collegium Invisibile gathers the contact network for people all over the world, for Polish academics all over the world, because we are in touch with the societies like Oxford Polish Society, Polish Students at Sciences Po, in Polish academics in Princeton, and these representatives are the members of Collegium Invisibile. But we have there are locals in the environment, and we made it as a connection in different fields and also in a different part of the world. Therefore, I would say this is more wide network when it comes to this connection. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Tatjana?
To the question, I perceive myself as art sciences. So the quality is given in its responsive interaction. I'm not doing production by performance of values, considering to make no damage, to stay in love doing otherwise, to provide and to promote planetary thinking, and to open space, to practice linguistics hospitality. So I hope it is in some way aesthetic, another aesthetic, and also always communication in dialogue. Thank you.
Yeah, very briefly on, yes, the answer is there is a very clear overlap. I mean, indigenous communities often share a very spiritual vision of nature, and quite often they also identify and align with also the other social cohesion values of major religious groups. So yeah, I would say yes.
Okay, thank you very much, Antonino, and thank you as well to each of these really great speakers. It's really been a pleasure to learn from every one of your presentations. And of course, thank you as well to the audience and for your questions and participation. I'll briefly mention that if you'd like to learn more about the INSIDE project and our historical research into science diplomacy, please visit our website, inside.eu, and that's INSIDE is spelled INSSCIDE. And you can also follow our Twitter page, inside_EU. And if you're interested in reliving our recent open conference that we had in Erlangen, which this webinar today is also associated with, you can find the live stream on YouTube now, on our YouTube channel. So just find our YouTube channel under that same name. And I also encourage anyone who's interested in being more involved with science diplomacy networks and science diplomacy news to get connected with the Science Diplomacy Alliance LinkedIn group. So with that, I will close our session. And if you have any more questions for the speakers, you have their contact information in the chat and also on the event page, which I think many of you found this webinar through on our website. And so feel free to reach out to them, and have a great afternoon to everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.